My name is Ursula Dane. I'm 39 years old, and I work as a mechanical engineer at a defense subcontractor in Northern Virginia. To most people, I'm just another veteran in steel-toe boots, quietly fixing things that keep other people safe. I keep my hair tied back. I keep my mouth shut. And for the last 5 years, I've kept my past buried 6 feet deep beneath a life that looks ordinary. That's how they told me to live, hidden, forgotten, until the day my father ordered me handcuffed. I stood outside the Capitol after a closed-door testimony on veteran mental health reform. I had just spoken, calmly, factually, about invisible wounds and how some of us came home not to medals, but to silence. Reporters gathered outside the rotunda. Cameras pointed my way. And then the sirens came. Military police surrounded me before I took my next breath. The officer read it out loud. His voice didn't even waver. Ursula Dane, you are under arrest for impersonating a Navy SEAL and falsifying service records. You are hereby charged under the Stolen Valor Act. I didn't fight. I didn't flinch. I simply turned my head toward the man standing behind them. General Albert Dane, retired, former director of Joint Special Operations, my father. He didn't look at me. Not directly, just kept his hands folded behind his back. Uniform pressed so stiff it could have stood without him. He had me handcuffed for impersonating a SEAL, shamed me in public, called me a disgrace behind closed doors. But what he didn't know, what he never thought to ask, was that the tattoo on my left scapula held a truth that could destroy the very legacy he spent his whole life trying to protect. Tattoo, bloodline, SEAL, truth revealed. The flash of metal cuffs burned worse than any battlefield. It wasn't just about humiliation. It was betrayal, surgical, precise, rehearsed like a war game. And I knew then. This wasn't about me being a fraud. This was about erasing what I knew, and who gave the order. They shoved me into the black SUV. No questions, no explanations. Inside the tinted glass, I could see my reflection, calm, unreadable, and absolutely not broken. I sat straight. I didn't beg. I waited. Because I knew. They could silence my words, but they couldn't erase the ink etched into my skin. 2 hours later, I was inside a secure holding room at Fort Braddock, the kind reserved for traitors, defectors, and ghosts. A female officer stood guard by the door. She wouldn't look me in the eye. The first to question me was Lieutenant Commander Eli Morrow, civil military liaison, clean-shaven, straight back, polished brass. He walked in with a thin manila folder and a smug certainty in his step. "I'll give you one chance, Ms. Dane," he said, without opening the folder. "You admit you fabricated your military service. We'll cut a deal. Misunderstanding, misremembered deployments. We won't pursue prison." I tilted my head. "Before we talk about fabricating history," I said evenly, "maybe you should ask who wrote it." He blinked. "You don't have records," he said. "We checked every database. No active duty assignment. No SEAL qualification. No DD-214. Nothing." I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the sleeve of my regulation-issued shirt. Yes, ironically, the same one they had just stripped me of on paper, and pulled it down to reveal the top edge of a tattoo. Black ink. Faded, but deliberate. Shaped like an inverted trident intersecting with 2 broken lines. Morrow scoffed. "A tattoo? Seriously?" I nodded toward the wall. "If you've got a clearance rating above Tier 5, I said, "run the Echo 7 protocol. Use biometric match against the identifier beneath my left scapula." He hesitated. "That protocol doesn't exist," he muttered. I shrugged. "Then I guess I'm just some lady with an artistic scar." 15 minutes passed. The room got colder. 2 more officers arrived. One with a facial scanner, the other carrying what looked like a portable DNA kit. They scanned my shoulder, pulled up a secure laptop with an air-gapped connection, entered 4 passcodes, waited. Then it happened. The screen blinked, once, then again. And then it displayed a symbol. The same tattoo, the one on my back, followed by a single line of text. "Access granted. Echo 7 operative. Status, deactivated. Level, redacted." Morrow stepped back like I'd slapped him. The other 2 stared. What is Echo 7? One whispered. But I just sat there, still. They wouldn't find it in any manual. Echo 7 was a Black Ops experimental SEAL unit, formed to test a new tier of warfare. Covert infiltration with full deniability. 12 candidates. 0 acknowledgement. No public record. Our missions didn't make headlines. They disappeared. Just like we did. I had been the second youngest member. Call sign, Keystone. 3 years of operations. 2 campaigns abroad. 1 mission that changed everything. And then we were gone. My father had ordered the shutdown, labeled us a failed concept, but he didn't just terminate the program. He wiped us from existence. And now, because I spoke too close to a truth someone wanted dead, he had me arrested. In front of the press, in front of the nation, to protect himself. I looked up at Morrow. "You still want me to admit I lied?" I asked. He didn't respond. The officer who once wouldn't meet my eyes now stood like a statue. The air in the room had changed. No one spoke for a full minute. Finally, Morrow leaned forward. "Who gave you that tattoo?" he asked quietly. I locked eyes with him. "My father," I said. He blinked. "He had it commissioned," I continued, "as a biometric signature. Each operative got a variant, tied to blood markers. Nerve response. No two alike. The only way to verify us, without paperwork." Morrow stared at me like I'd said the sun was square. "And you're telling me," he said, voice thin, "that the same man who ordered this biometric system is the one who had you arrested?" I nodded. "Yes, because the same man who taught me how to protect truth is terrified I'll speak it. My father was a soldier long before he was ever a dad. He didn't hug, he assessed. He didn't read bedtime stories, he debriefed. In our house, if you could call the rotating string of military base, housing a house, discipline didn't just matter, it was everything. By the time I was 6, I could recite the Navy's chain of command from memory. By 8, I could assemble a field pack blindfolded. At 10, I was running 2 miles before school. Not because I wanted to, but because failure earned silence. And silence from my father was the closest thing to affection I ever got. He said discipline was love. That structure made people safe, but all I ever felt was that I was another checklist to complete. There were rules for everything: how to sit, how to speak, how to fold my socks. We moved from base to base like chess pieces on a board I wasn't allowed to see. He called it adaptation. I called it what it was: loneliness. We never unpacked. There was never a reason to. Home wasn't where you felt safe. It was wherever the next assignment landed you. I learned to travel light, physically and emotionally. I learned not to cry. Not because it was weak, but because it served no tactical purpose. My father loved his country. I have no doubt about that. He wore that love in every salute, every medal, every scar he didn't talk about. But I never knew if he loved me. Not really. I was an extension of his mission. A mirror he was always trying to polish into something tougher, smarter, more precise. When I scraped my knee on the training course he built in our backyard, he didn't offer a bandage. He handed me a stopwatch and said, "Again." When I got the flu the night before the state math championship, he told me, "The world won't slow down for you. Win anyway." On my 12th birthday, instead of a cake, I got a laminated survival checklist and a weighted vest. His version of a party favor was a lecture on operational stamina. Even my name, Ursula, wasn't chosen from love or softness. It came from Latin, Ursa, the bear, a creature built for solitude, endurance, and quiet strength. I don't think he meant it to hurt. I think he meant it to protect. But it did both. People ask me if I hated him. The truth? No, I didn't hate him, I became him. I mirrored every expectation until I couldn't see where his ideals ended and my identity began. I wore his approval like armor. But even armor gets heavy after a while. Looking back, I don't remember warm dinners or late-night stories. I remember cadence drills echoing across early mornings. I remember the scratch of regulation sheets on bunk beds. I remember how praise was a nod and criticism was a closed door. He told me once, "Real love doesn't coddle. It makes you strong enough to survive without it." I believed him, for too long. That's what growing up under General Albert Dane felt like. Not a childhood, a conditioning. And yet, even now, I wonder if he thought he was doing the right thing. Maybe he didn't know how to be anything else. I wasn't supposed to make it past phase 1. Not because I wasn't strong enough. Not because I didn't have the skill. But because I was a woman. And at the time, that alone was disqualifying in the eyes of many, especially in the world my father built. But someone, somewhere, was willing to bet differently. It started with a knock on my bunk at 3:12 a.m. I was 3 weeks into a combat engineer course at Fort Leonard Wood. A man in plain fatigues handed me a sealed envelope and said only one word: voluntary. Inside was a single line: report to Coronado. No record, no acknowledgement, no return unless completed. It wasn't signed. It didn't have a unit, but I knew exactly what it meant. It was Bud S, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. The impossible gauntlet, the gatekeeper to the most elite force the Navy had ever known. I reported, quietly, alone. No press, no flag waving. I was one of 6 women selected for a classified pilot program. We trained at night, ate in isolation, slept in a secured wing that no one talked about. We were ghosts before we ever earned the right to breathe the same sand as the men. They broke us, then built us back. Hour by hour, muscle by muscle, thought by thought. We weren't trained to be seen. We were trained to vanish, to infiltrate, extract, and disappear. That's what Echo 7 was. A prototype SEAL unit designed for missions too controversial to exist on paper. They told us if we died, we'd be listed as civilian casualties. If we succeeded, no one would ever know. I remember the day we passed our final assessment. We stood in a concrete room under red lights. No ceremony, no applause. Just a small table with black patches. No name, no rank. Only a symbol, a broken trident inside a ring of silence. That was our badge. A badge without a name. We were told to sew it into the inner lining of our gear. Never on the outside, never visible, never spoken of. I didn't care. I didn't need the world to clap. For the first time, I felt real. Defined not by my father's shadow, but by my own grit. And then came the briefings for Operation Lifeline Dust. We were told only what we needed to know. A high-value target embedded deep in disputed territory. American hostages potentially at risk. Intelligence shaky, but urgent. The op required surgical precision, fast, silent, deniable. 12 of us were deployed, all Echo 7, no backup, no extraction guarantee. If it went south, we'd be written off. I wasn't afraid. I'd been preparing for this my whole life. I was a soldier now, not his daughter, not a symbol, not a story, just capable. But when the mission went wrong, and it did go terribly wrong, there were no calls made, no emergency protocols activated. And when I finally made it home, the world looked at me like I was lying. Because Echo 7 didn't exist. Because the operation was denied. And because the man who could have confirmed it, the one person who knew what I was, stood silent. My own father. He gave me the discipline to survive, but not the name to be believed. We were wheels up at 0200, 12 of us, no insignia, no records. Just black gear, encrypted comms, and a single satellite ping we had to reach before sunrise. The mission was simple, they said. Get in, confirm, get out. It always sounded simple on paper, but paper doesn't bleed. We dropped into northern Afghanistan by halo jump. Altitude was high, winds were worse. One of our team, Lewis, sprained her ankle on landing. She taped it tight and kept moving. No one quit on Echo 7. We moved silent through a ravine, following coordinates to a compound reportedly holding 2 American aid workers. Intel said low security, minimal resistance. The intel was wrong. The compound was wired, too clean, too quiet. I felt it before I saw it. A child's toy on the front step, perfectly placed. No dust, no wear. Booby trap. The first IED hit the rear flank. We lost contact with Bravo team. Shay screamed over the comms that Rodriguez was down. Then the second blast hit, closer this time. Static drowned out everything else. My ears rang so hard I thought I was underwater. We split instinctively, 6 in, 6 out. I took lead on the eastern wall. We breached, found no hostages, no enemy combatants. Just a room with 12 chairs. Empty, waiting. It was a trap. They'd built it for us, designed to look like a rescue op. Just credible enough to activate a ghost unit. They wanted us to come. We were the target. By the time we realized it, 3 of us were already dead. Rodriguez, throat shredded by shrapnel. Miles, shot while covering extraction. Nguyen, stepped on a secondary mine while pulling Lewis to cover. I took a hit to the side, rib cage, lower lung. Couldn't breathe right for days. I crawled with one arm, dragging my rifle and half my body through a trench of dust and blood. For 4 weeks I stayed alive in terrain that didn't want me. Ate what I could steal. Drank rainwater from tarp corners and boot prints. At night, I slept with a knife in my boot and a fever climbing high enough to make me hallucinate. They hunted me, local militia, foreign contractors, maybe even some who wore the same uniform I once did. I stopped trusting insignias. I stopped trusting radio signals. Everything felt like bait. I made it to a supply station on the edge of Herat by sheer accident. A medic took one look at me and said, "Jesus Christ, are you real?" He called in a medevac. They patched me up, sent me home. I landed in DC 2 weeks later, half my weight and carrying pieces of 3 people in my memory I would never forget. But when I reported in, gave my unit number, my operation tag, even my Echo 7 badge, they told me no such mission had ever been authorized. They told me my unit didn't exist. They said I had never deployed. I remember sitting in that office, still stitched up and bleeding through gauze, while a junior officer tried to hand me a clipboard for a post-service counseling referral. I didn't scream, I didn't flip the desk. I just looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Then who the hell died out there with me?" He had no answer, and from that day forward, I stopped looking for one. I found the signature 3 months after I got home. It was buried inside a redacted file I wasn't supposed to access, one that came to me anonymously through a proxy I'll never name. It was a deactivation directive, stamped top secret, Executive Defense Authority, dated 10 days after Lifeline dust went sideways, and signed, General Albert Dane, my father. He hadn't just known about the operation. He'd shut it down, erased it, nullified every trace of our existence. He'd written the order that made my pain, my scars, and my dead teammates vanish into a paperless grave. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a forgery, a cruel joke, but I knew the sharp hook of his pen. The clean pressure points, the way he never looped his D. I'd watched him sign 1,000 orders growing up. This was his. I confronted him 2 weeks later. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. Just the two of us in his Pentagon office, one filled with medals, photos, and a flag folded perfectly in glass behind him. A room that smelled like importance and absence. I laid the file on his desk, said nothing, just waited. He stared at it, then at me. He didn't flinch. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said. But I did. It was classified. It was my life. He leaned back, exhaled, eyes dark like the war zones he'd survived. "You don't understand, Ursula. There are levels to this. You followed orders. So did I." "No," I said, my voice low. "I buried friends because of those orders. I dragged a broken ribcage across sand for 30 days. I lost everything, and when I came home, you buried me too." He looked tired. Not guilty, just tired. Echo 7 was never meant to succeed, he finally said. It was a test program. High failure risk. Politically explosive. When the mission compromised national integrity, it had to be disavowed. "You mean covered up?" "I mean neutralized." I remember standing there, fists clenched, heart screaming behind my ribs. I wasn't his daughter in that moment. I was just another unsecured variable. "You didn't just erase a file," I whispered. "You erased 12 people." He turned away, stared out the window like the Capitol dome held answers. "I protected something bigger than you'll ever know." "No," I said. "You protected your own record, your own reputation. You saw us die and chose silence because it was cleaner." He didn't deny it. That's what broke me more than anything. Not that he lied. Not even that he let me rot in obscurity. But that he believed he did the right thing. "I raised you to be strong," he said. "And you survived. That's all that matters." "No," I replied. "Truth matters. Memory matters. The names of the dead matter." There was nothing left to say. I walked out without taking the file. Let him keep his legacy. I had something he didn't. I had the truth, tattooed under my skin, marked into bone and blood. where no signature could erase it. They deleted the records, but they couldn't delete my skin. For years, I kept it hidden, covered beneath my left shoulder blade, just under the seam where a regulation uniform shirt would naturally end. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was trained to protect it. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't personal expression. It was protocol. A single line of numbers, burned into my flesh in matte black ink. 11 digits, one coordinate, half a key. The other half belonged to someone else. Each of us in Echo 7 bore a fragment. Paired, the full coordinate pointed to a classified fallback cache buried in the Helmand Valley. A contingency, proof we existed, proof we were sent. Split apart, the information meant nothing. Together, it was undeniable. We called it the Covenant Code, our pact. A silent rebellion against the erasure we knew might come. I didn't know who held the other half of mine. That was intentional. Redundancy, security. Layers of separation in case any of us were compromised. All I knew was that if I ever found the match, I'd find the truth. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find someone else who remembered what we lost. The ink had faded slightly over the years. Sunlight, sweat, time, it all wore things down. But the scar tissue underneath? That remained. A faint burn ringed the tattoo from where shrapnel had grazed me during lifeline dust. It made the numbers harder to read. But they were still there, still mine. I remember the day I showed it publicly for the first time. It wasn't in a court, not in front of Congress, not on the front page of a national newspaper. It was in a bar, a dingy, forgotten place in Norfolk. I was sitting at the far end, nursing a bottle of something cheap and sharp, when I noticed a woman watching me. Not staring, watching, military bearing, controlled breath. Left hand scarred from a rope burn. That told me everything I needed to know. She approached without a word, slid into the booth across from me, and slowly rolled up her sleeve. There it was, the other half, perfectly aligned. When I stood and turned, pulled my collar aside, her eyes locked on mine. Not in recognition, in confirmation. "Your Echo?" she asked. I was. "Then you're not crazy." And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. We exchanged names, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that we carried the living proof of a mission our government said never happened. What mattered was that somewhere out there, buried in a steel vault beneath 60 meters of rock, was a container full of encrypted hard drives, helmet cam footage, blood-sealed orders, and maybe, just maybe, justice. They could redact memos, they could erase logs, they could bury careers, but they couldn't burn the coordinates off our skin. Our tattoos weren't decoration, they were testimony. Every time someone called me a liar, a fraud, an impersonator. Every time my father stood at a podium and said there were no women in SEAL teams. Every time my history was scrubbed from official record. I'd trace my fingers along those 11 digits. And I'd remember that my story wasn't just memory. It was ink. It was scar. It was real. The first headline read, "Navy SEAL imposter claims elite service, no record found." The second, "Daughter of 4-star general accused of faking military honors." By the end of the week, the story had gone national. It didn't matter that I had the scars. It didn't matter that I had the tattoo. It didn't even matter that I had found someone with the matching half of the coordinates. All that mattered was the file they held up on live television, my service record, redacted to a footnote. Logistics coordinator, medical discharge, non-combat. A lie, manufactured, delivered to the press with surgical timing, and backed by the one man the country trusted without question, General Albert Dane, my father. He stood behind the podium at the Pentagon, composed as always, his voice calm, measured, but decisive. "We do not take accusations of stolen valor lightly. The integrity of our armed forces depends on truth, honor, and verification. While I understand my daughter's emotional investment in her beliefs, we've conducted an exhaustive internal audit. No record of her SEAL training exists. No deployment, no special unit. I grieve the confusion this has caused, but facts are facts." He never even looked into the camera. I watched it all from a motel room with water stains on the ceiling and a pistol under my pillow. Not because I was afraid of being attacked, but because I was afraid of what I might do if I didn't anchor myself. That broadcast was the final nail. Suddenly, I wasn't just a forgotten soldier. I was a fraud, a disgrace, a punchline on late-night shows. She says she fought with ghosts. Turns out she just sees them. They called it a mental break. PTSD-induced fantasy. Some said I'd fabricated the whole unit as a way to impress my powerful father. One commentator said, "You'd think the daughter of a general could find a better lie." They didn't just question my credibility. They dismantled it. Veterans groups denounced me. Online forums swarmed with hate. Men I'd trained with, men who knew what I could do, went silent. Their careers were still intact. Mine was ash. But what they never understood was that I'd already survived worse. I'd survived being forgotten. I'd survived 30 days in the desert, bleeding, hunted, buried alive by bureaucracy. I could survive this too. Still, it hurt. Not just the betrayal, not just the humiliation, but the precision of it all. My father hadn't just discredited me. He'd built the machine that made it happen. Every interview, every leak, every anonymous source that surfaced to paint me unstable, it was orchestrated. I could see the playbook because I was raised inside it. He wanted to protect the system, and I was now the threat to that system. He told someone, I found the transcript later, she's not dangerous, but if people believe her, then everything we've kept in the dark comes into question. So he branded me a liar. He didn't kill me, he erased me. But he underestimated one thing. The truth doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. It waits, it festers, and eventually it finds a voice. And mine had just begun to speak. It took me 3 years to find her. Shay Ramirez, Echo 7's forward recon. Smartest boots in the unit. She had a sixth sense for movement, for reading terrain like Braille. The last time I saw her, she was limping toward the outer perimeter, bleeding from the leg, yelling for Rodriguez to fall back. Then the second blast hit. I never saw her again. I assumed she was dead. We all did. Command listed her as MIA, no body recovered, no dog tags confirmed. Her name wasn't even on the unofficial channels. Like she had vaporized with the rest of us. But then a whisper reached me, from a nurse who used to work VA psych intake in Arizona. A quiet, coded message. Said she had a patient who never used her real name, but mumbled about Echo 7 in her sleep. Said the woman had scars down her spine like burn marks, and a tattoo she never let anyone see. My heart stopped. I drove 18 hours without resting. When I reached the clinic, it was dusk. The building was plain, isolated, and guarded by layers of silence more than security. They let me sign in as family. I didn't correct them. She was in room 214. I knocked once. No answer. I opened the door slowly. And there she was. Alive. Hair shorter. Shoulders thinner. Eyes haunted. She sat cross-legged on the floor, rocking slightly, watching static flicker on a small TV that wasn't plugged in. I crouched beside her. My voice almost broke. "Shay?" She blinked. Looked at me like through fog. Then, slowly, her eyes sharpened. Recognition flickered. Her lips parted. "You made it," she whispered. We sat in silence for a long time. There were no speeches, no apologies, just breath and memory and the cold weight of survival neither of us had expected. Later that night, she let me see it. She unbuttoned her sleeve, trembling, and turned her arm to reveal the ink. Faded, fractured by scar tissue, but unmistakable. 11 digits. The second half of mine. I turned, pulled my shirt down across my shoulder blade, showed her mine. She reached out, touched the numbers. For the first time in years, she smiled. It was cracked and quiet, but it was real. "We weren't crazy," she said. "No, we were buried." We spent the next 3 hours piecing together the truth. Literally, we wrote down both halves on the back of a medication form and matched the sequence. The full coordinates led to a grid in Helmand, outside the known NATO operation zones, a dead zone, the perfect place to hide an off-the-books cache. But it wasn't just the location that mattered. It was the timestamp encoded next to it. 0429 Zulu, April 29th, the day we were dropped in, the day we were supposed to be extracted. The timestamp confirmed what we always knew. They'd planned the withdrawal, and they left us anyway. "Why would they do it?" Shay asked. I didn't have the heart to tell her yet, that it was my father's signature on the kill order, that the man who trained us from childhood had been the one who sealed our silence. That truth would come later. For now, she needed one thing: to know we hadn't imagined it, to know her pain had meaning, that her scars weren't madness, that our story was real. Before I left, she pressed something into my hand, a flash drive. "What is it?" I asked. "Helmet cam," she said. "Mine, from that night. It's broken, but maybe you can make it talk again." I held it like a heartbeat. "Will you come with me?" She shook her head. "Not yet, not ready." "I'll come when the truth does," she said. I wasn't the one who leaked the footage. That part was out of my hands. A freelance journalist named Talia Krell got it first. She worked with a digital forensics lab in Boston. Her brother was a vet. He owed Shay a life. When I passed her the flash drive, I expected analysis, quiet documentation, maybe a buried report read by a few. I didn't expect it to explode. 48 hours after she decrypted it, the footage aired nationwide, uncut, unfiltered, unignorable. Night vision, gunfire, coordinates whispered in the dark. Female voices barking orders, blood, static, screams. And one word, clear as day. Echo 7, fall back. It was irrefutable. We existed. And we were left behind. What followed was the storm I'd spent years bracing for, but even I wasn't ready for the scale. The country split in two. One side called me a hero, a whistleblower, the face of women in covert combat who'd been erased by policy and pride. Hashtags exploded. Hasi Echo 7 was real, and Raksh believe Ursula, and Rahar, truth has scars. Veteran support groups demanded hearings. Female service members posted their own scars in solidarity. A senator called for an emergency review of Operation Lifeline Dust and questioned who had the authority to bury it. But the other side? They came with fire. They called the video AI-generated, deep-fake propaganda, foreign disinformation. Anchors with silver hair and sharp tongues painted me as a mentally unstable woman chasing attention. One even called me the Jussie Smollett of special ops. But the sharpest blade came from my father. Again. He stepped in front of the same press room, same flag, same measured tone. "This so-called footage is unverified and dangerous," he said. "It threatens to undermine the credibility of every legitimate operation we've conducted. I have no knowledge of Echo 7. I have no daughter in that unit. I grieve for the chaos this story has caused." He said it with such calm authority, the way only a man who'd worn ribbons his whole life could. To some it sounded like order. To others, it sounded like betrayal wrapped in medals. They called it a family feud, a personal vendetta. Late-night shows edited together clips of my father and me, making jokes about Thanksgiving dinners with tactical drones. They didn't understand this wasn't about family. It was about the system. One built to protect secrets at any cost, even if that cost was daughters. A panel show brought on 2 generals and 1 psychologist. They questioned my mental health, asked whether imagined trauma could explain my certainty. One of them even had the gall to say, if these women really were part of a covert op, wouldn't they have just followed the chain of command instead of leaking to the media? I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I sat in my apartment, lights off, watching my name scroll under banners. Veteran or liar, Echo 7, courage or conspiracy. They debated me like I was a segment. But you know what kept me grounded? Shay. She texted me 4 words that night. We still have us. And that meant something. I wasn't alone. We weren't ghosts. We were fire, waiting for oxygen. And now the world had seen the first spark. The courtroom was sterile, cold, polished to the point of reflection. You could see yourself in the floors if you dared to look down. I didn't. Instead, I looked ahead, to the men in uniform seated behind the long desk. Their medals caught the overhead light. Their expressions didn't. No cameras, no press. Just ranks, folders, and silence. I stood alone. Not as a daughter, not as a soldier, but as something more dangerous, a witness with evidence. My opening was simple, deliberate. I am Lieutenant Commander Ursula Dane, SEAL Echo 7, service number redacted, but biologically verifiable. Today I'm here not to reclaim my honor, but to restore the truth you erased. I handed over 3 items. First, a sealed envelope from the Department of Naval Operations Archives, forced open through a court-ordered FOIA exemption. Inside, deployment logs, heavily redacted, but one page still held a partial transmission. It mentioned Operation Lifeline Dust, and Echo 7 by name. Second, a medical scan from Shay's attending physician. Embedded beneath her epidermis, a biometric ink tracer, encoded GPS coordinates, precisely matching the ones on my shoulder. The scan included heat signatures confirming the ink was metabolized through direct bloodstream interaction, standard for covert seal authentication. Third, a signed affidavit from the systems engineer who built the biometric verification terminal in the West Coast Command Center. She testified, under oath, that my scan matched a now-deleted Echo 7 entry ID'd under the name Dagger 7. A call sign that had been registered only once, to me. For a moment, the room didn't breathe. A lieutenant in the far corner glanced toward the door, maybe looking for a superior to interrupt the silence. No one moved. I continued. I know you want to say it's a fabrication, that somehow I faked every shred of this, but let me ask one thing. If I'm lying, why did the system verify my blood? Silence again. They didn't answer, because they couldn't. One of the officers, a woman with streaks of gray at her temples, folded her hands and leaned forward. What do you want from this hearing, Commander Dane? I paused, then said the quiet truth. I want my team's names back. He didn't look at me when I walked past him, not when I took the stand, not when I laid out the coordinates, not even when the tribunal confirmed my identity through encrypted biometric match. He stared at the wood grain of the table as if willing it to open and swallow him whole. General Albert Dane, my father, decorated warfighter, architect of modern asymmetrical doctrine, the man who raised me on silence, structure, and steel. Now reduced to nothing more than a trembling shadow in a 4-star uniform. When the presiding officer turned to him and asked if he had a rebuttal, he said nothing, not even a nod. Just sat there, breathing, barely. The room waited. Everyone leaned forward. Even the stenographer paused, unsure whether to record the absence of a voice. Then, finally, he lifted his eyes. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in them. Not fear of consequence, not fear of disgrace, but fear of something far worse. Recognition. He looked at me and saw the truth he'd buried crawl back into the light, wearing his daughter's face. When he spoke, it was not the voice of a general. It was the voice of a man undone. I thought I was protecting something, he said. The mission, the institution, legacy. His hand trembled as it gripped the table edge. But in the end, I think I was just protecting myself. No one said a word. Not the judges, not the aides, not even me. He looked at me once more, and something inside him broke. I didn't need an apology, I didn't need a speech. I just needed the truth to be bigger than his denial. And in that moment, it was. He didn't cry. That would have been too human for a man who'd spent a lifetime being a symbol. But he did something far more devastating. He took off his stars, unpinned them, one by one, and set them gently on the table like fragments of a myth. Then he stood, without ceremony, without excuse, and walked out of the room, leaving behind the only war he'd ever lost. The package was unmarked, no return address, just my name, typed, not handwritten, and a tracking number that led nowhere. It arrived 3 days after the verdict, 3 days after my father surrendered his stars and vanished from the public eye. No press statement, no interviews, just a retirement notice posted quietly in a back page of a military newsletter, next to a recipe for navy bean soup. I almost didn't open it. Part of me thought it might be hate mail. The other part thought maybe he was still trying to control the narrative. But curiosity won. Inside was a simple black box, foam-lined. No documents, no letter, just a lighter, old, scuffed. The kind he'd carried my entire life. I used to watch him flick it open with one hand, like a magician with fire. He never smoked, not really. He just liked the click, the spark, the ritual. I held it in my palm, cold, heavier than I remembered. Then I turned it over. There was an engraving. It wasn't factory-made. It looked etched by hand. Wobbly lines, imperfect spacing. But the words were clear. Forgive me, I failed you before the world did. My throat tightened. And suddenly, the memories weren't just memories. They were wounds, reopening under the gentlest pressure. I remembered the first time he looked disappointed in me. I was 9. I cried during a training simulation at Fort Hamilton. The other kids, sons and daughters of brass, laughed. I'd twisted my ankle, and the pain was real, but he stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, lips thin. He didn't comfort me. He didn't speak. He just turned away. I thought he was ashamed. But now, holding this lighter, I wondered if maybe he'd been afraid. Afraid that loving me too openly would make me soft. Afraid that tenderness would make me weak. That in trying to prepare me for a world full of betrayal, he'd become the first betrayal. I remembered the night before I deployed. He didn't say goodbye, just handed me a folded piece of paper with coordinates and a call sign. If it ever gets dark, he said, find your way back to this. Then he walked away. I thought it was tactical, cold-blooded. Now I saw the tremble in his fingers for what it was. Not indifference, but restraint. He was always trying not to break. And he did anyway. I pressed the lighter to my chest and closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something close. I flicked the lighter once. The flame caught instantly. Steady, sure. And for the first time in years, I let it burn. Not to destroy, but to remember. Because sometimes the deepest revenge isn't exposing a lie. It's surviving it. And choosing to live without becoming it. They offered me a medal. It came in a velvet box, with a citation signed by people who had once erased me. They called it a rectification of oversight, and a symbol of restored honor. I didn't take it. Not out of anger, out of principle. You don't get to bury the truth and then hand it back wrapped in gold. That's not restitution. That's PR. So I left. Not in disgrace this time, not in chains. I walked out on my own terms, head up, name intact, no parade, no speech, just breath. For the first time in years, I felt it move through my chest without weight. But I wasn't done. There were others like me. I started with a list, names whispered over coffee in basement bars, in therapy circles, in hushed phone calls from VA offices that didn't want to be on record, men and women whose missions had never made the news, whose dog tags had been turned to ash by bureaucracy, who carried scars with no country to belong to. I called the organization Sable Line. The name came from the blacked-out line on a report that nearly cost me my life, the one that said Echo 7, redacted. Now it meant something else. Now it meant you exist. You matter. You still have a name. We operated out of a small office above a mechanic shop in Virginia Beach. 1 fax machine, 2 laptops, and 3 of us. Me, Shay, and a Marine intelligence officer named Marcus, who'd once been told, your service never happened. We started by documenting the undocumented. We listened to stories. We gathered records. We taught veterans how to file sealed disclosures and demand acknowledgement under whistleblower protections. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't fast. But it was real, and it grew. By the end of the first year, we had 63 cases under review by the Department of Defense. By year 2, Congress had scheduled its first closed-door hearing on classified deployment trauma. I didn't speak at that hearing. I sent Shay. Because her voice mattered just as much as mine, and I sat in the back row, listening, not as a soldier, not even as a founder, but as a survivor. I used to think revenge meant watching the people who hurt you fall. Now I understand. Real revenge is building something they never imagined you could. It's refusing to disappear. It's giving others the tools to stay standing when the system tries to knock them silent. And above all, above medals, vindication, or apology, it's this. I still have my name. And no one will ever take it again. It wasn't official. There were no flags, no salutes, no memorial plaques. Just a rented cabin in the Blue Ridge, far from headlines and questions. A long weekend in October, when the leaves turned gold like quiet applause. We were 6 of the original Echo 7, 6 ghosts who'd once been written out of every record, now finally sharing the same air again. Without codenames, without comms, without fear. Shay brought the coffee. Real coffee. Not the powdered rations we used to hoard like currency. Maya limped through the door with a cane carved from Afghan cedar, a gift from a farmer she saved during a mission the Pentagon never admitted happened. Lauren wore her hair gray now, not because of age, but because she said she was tired of pretending to be invisible. We hugged. Awkward at first, then real. We didn't talk about the operation right away, or the fire team we lost, or the days spent bleeding in the mountains, whispering each other's names like prayers over a broken radio. We made chili, played cards, laughed, softly at first, then louder until it echoed off the walls like gunfire turned to music. Shay laughed the hardest. She hadn't laughed in years. She said so herself, in the quiet after midnight, when it was just the two of us on the porch. "I didn't think I'd ever find this again," she whispered. "The sound of being human." I handed her my flask, just water this time, and we sat in silence, not the heavy kind. The kind that makes room for healing. No one asked why we were forgotten. We all knew the answer. It was easier to bury women than to explain why we'd been sent where no one wanted to admit we belonged. But we were here, alive, unrecognized, maybe, but unbroken. At dawn on the last day, we stood in a circle and pressed our palms together. 6 women. 6 halves of a story once split, now whole again. I looked around and saw more than soldiers. I saw architects of legacy. Not the kind that's etched in stone. The kind etched in scars. We didn't need a podium. We didn't need a medal. We had something rarer. We had each other. And that was enough. My name is Ursula Dane, and I stayed standing. Not because I was unbroken, but because I chose not to let the brokenness define me. I used to think survival was about toughness, that if I could just endure, just outlast the fire, I'd win. But the truth is, survival is softer than that. It's not grit, it's grace. It's knowing when to put the armor down and let the scars speak for themselves. And mine speak volumes. I walk now without fear, not because I know what's coming, but because I know who I am when it comes. The world will forget our names again someday. That's how history works. It edits, it trims, it makes room for the next narrative. But I am no longer afraid of being forgotten, because I didn't fight to be remembered. I fought to be real. I fought to prove, if only to myself, that I was here, that I lived, that I bled, that I mattered, not as a daughter, not as a soldier, but as me. When my father left that courtroom, he took silence with him. I haven't heard from him since. No letters, no more lighters, no more shadows, just a single absence that no longer has power over me. And maybe that's the real ending, not some dramatic confrontation, not vengeance, not reconciliation, just space. Space to be, to breathe, to build something in the wreckage and call it life. They still ask if I want a statue, a ceremony, a headline. I say no, because those things rust, fade, get dusted off once a year and then forgotten again. But the lives Echo 7 saved? The families that got closure because we never stopped speaking. Those things endure. They endure in a kid who finds their mother's old medal and Googles her name. They endure in a therapist's file where the words "finally validated" are underlined 3 times. They endure in Shay's laughter when it no longer sounds like a scream turned inward. And they endure in me. This morning I walked alone, out by the coastline, where the waves come in soft and slow. There was no one around, no one to salute or question me, just the wind, and the sun, rising, gold and unapologetic. I stood there for a long time, and I didn't think of the battles. I didn't think of my rank, or my missions, or the father who once called me a disgrace. I thought of breath, of light, of my name, Ursula Dane, that's all. And when I finally turned to walk back up the hill, I didn't look over my shoulder, because there's nothing left behind me that I need. No permission, no apology, no ghost, just the sound of my own footsteps, and the sunrise at my back. I remember the cuffs, not their coldness, that part's expected. What I remember is the sound they made, that sharp click, mechanical, precise, like someone closing a vault on the last part of me I hadn't yet buried. My wrist didn't fight, my voice didn't rise, and yet the world called me defiant. I suppose they were right. I wasn't defiant in the way they thought, screaming, spitting, wild with rage. No, my defiance was quieter. It was in how I stood, how I looked my father in the eye when he gave the order, how I didn't flinch when the flashbulbs captured the image they'd sell on every channel. Disgraced woman impersonating Seal, caught by her own father. A cleaner narrative, easier to package. They didn't know the truth was etched in my skin, that the tattoo on my shoulder wasn't decoration or rebellion or fraud. It was a coordinate, a code, a promise, half of a secret. The rest, held by women whose names never made the rosters, whose medals were handed to others, whose silence was mistaken for absence. They said I impersonated a seal, but I was one. I just didn't come with the version of heroism they liked. Too quiet, too messy, too real. They wanted stories that ended in flag-draped coffins or promotion ceremonies, not surgeries in field tents, or missions that dissolved into black ink on reports. I bled for my name. And then I watched as it was erased, letter by letter, order by order, lie by lie. But here's the thing about names. You don't keep them with paperwork. You keep them with memory, with the way others say it when they think of you, with the weight it carries long after the shouting ends. I am Ursula Dane, and I was arrested on national television because I refused to let my name be stolen. I've watched the footage since. They still play it sometimes, on internet forums, in exposés, during memorial specials where my father's legacy is debated by men who never wore the uniform. They always pause on my face, searching for shame. They never find it. What they miss is what happened next, what came after the flash, after the headline, after the chains. What came after was truth, revealed not in courtroom speeches or news cycles, but in the quiet, in veterans finally finding their records, in a girl tracing the tattoo on her aunt's shoulder and asking, "Were you one of them?" In Shay's laughter, in Maya's cedar cane, in my morning walks by the water, each step a chapter they never wrote down. I don't regret the arrest. I don't regret the silence that followed, because I know who I am now, not just in uniform, not just as a daughter, not even as a survivor, but as a keeper of truth. And no matter how much they try to redact or spin or bury, that's something they can never cuff again. The room is quiet. No uniforms, no medals, no gavel pounding against wood. Just me and the mirror. I sit in the middle of my apartment, bare walls, one chair, one overhead light. A space stripped of decoration, of distraction. A space that holds only what cannot be erased. I roll up the sleeve of my cotton shirt, slowly, as if the movement itself matters, and there it is, the tattoo. A faded black coordinate inked near the top of my shoulder blade. A line of numbers, uneven, imperfect, stretched across old scar tissue. Most people wouldn't know what they were looking at. They'd see a relic, maybe a regret. But I know better. It's a map, a confession, a resurrection. That mark has outlasted files, tribunals, and silence. It has survived weather, sweat, and betrayal. It's changed with me, dark once, now softer, like a secret that's grown comfortable being known. I reach up and trace it with my fingertips, not with pride, not with pain, just acknowledgement. This tattoo once split me in half. Half the truth I carried, half the truth Shay did, half of a life lived in the dark. Now, it's all here, unified, whole. The world thinks justice happens in headlines or courtroom victories. But justice, real justice, is this. Being able to sit in silence and not flinch. Not wonder if you're still invisible. Not wonder if you're still a fraud. Just breathe. I tilt the mirror slightly. Light catches the ink. It gleams for half a second, like the sun remembering something. I smile. Not because I won, but because I lived. The truth didn't save me. I saved it. And it stayed. Through missions denied. Through family fractured. Through a name dragged and nearly erased. The truth stayed. Not because the system protected it, but because I refused to let it go. They thought they could burn it. But the body remembers. And so does the skin. The tattoo is softer now. Age does that. But it's still there, like memory that refuses to die quietly. Some nights, I still wake up to ghosts. Not the dead, the forgotten. The women who didn't come back. The promises we made. The history that doesn't have a nameplate. But I whisper to them softly. I kept it. They know what I mean. I stand from the chair, lower my sleeve, and walk past the mirror. I don't look back. I don't need to. I carry the truth with me now, in more than just skin, in breath, in silence, in every step I take that is no longer haunted. My name is Ursula Dane. I was once called a liar, once called a disgrace, but the truth never fades, and neither did I. I never sent the letter. I wrote it on a plain sheet of paper, no header, no signature, just my handwriting in blue ink, steady but tired. I folded it once, tucked it into a notebook, and left it there, not because I was waiting, but because writing it was enough. The words didn't need to travel, they just needed to exist. And maybe, if there's still something in the world that connects us, they already did. This is what it said. If you ever find this, if your eyes happen to land on these words one day, somehow, somewhere, know that I lived. Not because of what you did, but in spite of it. I didn't live for medals, or promotions, or to prove you wrong. I lived because I wanted to feel the sun again, because I wanted to walk without shame, because I needed to believe that I was more than the silence you tried to bury me under. You were a man carved out of duty, stone and legacy, a uniform before you were a father. And I used to think that if I became like you, hard enough, precise enough, silent enough, you might love me the way you loved your medals. I was wrong. You didn't need another soldier. You needed a reflection. And when I became more than that, when I became something you couldn't control or explain, you called me a threat, an impersonator. But I wasn't. I was your daughter. I still am. And this is the part that might matter most, though I doubt you'll believe it. I forgive you, not for you, for me. Because carrying your shame was never my weight. Because healing means choosing myself, over and over again. And I choose to let go of the courtroom, of the silence, of the tattoo that once felt like a brand, of the image of you watching me from the press box, arms crossed, heart shut tight. I choose breath, and morning light, and laughter I don't have to earn. I don't need an apology. I needed release, and I gave it to myself. This isn't a plea. It's not a trap. It's not a door left open. It's just a truth, quiet, unshakable, like me. I refolded the letter. I never read it aloud, didn't burn it, didn't seal it in an envelope. Just let it live in that drawer, that quiet drawer next to my window, where the light hits around noon. I open it sometimes, not to reread, but to remind myself that the act of writing it was the real act of freedom. Forgiveness is strange. It doesn't look like it does in movies. There's no big hug, no tears, no reconciliation under a soft piano score. Sometimes it's just a line you draw inside yourself and never cross again. I still walk past the base where his name is etched in stone. General Albert Dane. They don't know the rest of the story. And they don't need to. Because I do. Because I lived it. And because I let it go. So no, he'll never read the letter. But I did. And that was enough. It was late afternoon when she knocked. 3 soft taps, uncertain. Like someone not sure whether to ask or turn away. I opened the door. She couldn't have been more than 20. Hair pulled back, eyes steady but raw. A recruit maybe, or maybe not yet. She held a folded piece of paper in one hand. The other trembled just enough to tell me everything I needed to know. I heard your story, she said. Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't loud either, more like a confession dressed up as courage. I want to fight for something real, something bigger than me. I want to serve, but I don't want to disappear doing it. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. We didn't sit, didn't rush. She glanced at the wall behind me, bare except for one photo. Echo 7. The one they didn't think to erase. Our faces half-shadowed in the sun, uniforms dusty, eyes fierce. Are they still around? She asked quietly. Some, I said. Some found other names. Some built new lives. One of them finally started laughing again. She smiled, just a little. And in her smile, I saw something I hadn't felt in a while. Not admiration, not apology, not even hope. Just continuation. Like the story didn't end with me. Like maybe it wasn't meant to. I asked her why she really came, She didn't hesitate. I'm not here to ask for glory or to prove anything. I want to belong to a truth I won't have to bury. I nodded. That was enough. I handed her a cup of warm water. No fancy tea, no symbolism. Just something grounding, something real. And we sat there, 2 generations divided by time, united by a scar neither of us could see. Before she left, she paused by the door. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Everything?" I looked her in the eye. "No," I said. "Not the missions, not the silence, not even the betrayal." She tilted her head, unsure. I continued. "Because it led me here, and because sometimes the scars don't hurt. They guide. They mark the roads we took to survive." And just like that, she nodded, as if that single sentence had been waiting in her chest for years. As she disappeared down the steps, into the quiet hum of early evening, I felt something shift. Not closure, not pride, but return. A return of names once erased, of stories whispered too softly to be heard, of women who didn't vanish, they were just waiting to be found. And maybe now they're coming home. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.